act of courage of conviction. Similarly, highly regulated Indian economy, where public sector used to enjoy the commanding height. When P.V. Narasimha Rao found that it had degenerated into the stagnation and inefficiency, he did not hesitate to bring radical reforms, to introduce dynamism and exploitation of the economic potential of the country. He went away from traditionalism, as every Prime Minister, except only Jawaharlal Nehru, who appointed a civil servant and economic expert C.D. Deshmukh as Finance Minister of India in the early years of his administration. He was the second Prime Minister to introduce the radical reforms in Indian economy to unleash the forces of latent potentiality of growth and expansion. He chose not a veteran politician as his finance minister, but an economic expert and an eminent economist, Dr. Manmohan Singh. I am particularly happy that they have chosen to start the celebration from 24th July, as that was the day when 3 decades ago the first budget of P.V. Narasimha Rao's government was presented to Parliament on 24th July. P.V. Narasimha Rao became Prime Minister at a very crucial time, not only in economy, where the situation was such that India's foreign exchange reserves plummeted to just $1 billion US, which was well enough to support the 2 weeks import. Political instability was also there. In fact, for over a decade, after Indira Ji's death, there was political uncertainty, and the tendency to form government by a coalition of political parties, sometimes having divergent views, began in the country. At one stage he provided the stability, and on the other hand he also encouraged those who belong to the lower categories of the society, upcoming ideological youngsters, to come and encourage their political activities and push them ahead in the country's national politics. I was known to him, rather we knew each other from the early 70s, when he became the Chief Minister of Andhra Pradesh. Andhra Pradesh was first the part of undivided Madras Presidency. During the British days, whole of Deccan was divided as far as the British domination is concerned into two presidential provinces, Madras Presidency and Bombay Presidency. After Sri Ramalu's death, Andhra Pradesh was separated from Madras province, and thereafter, much later, it was decided to have Telangana carving out of Madras province. He was born in Telangana, but he was an Indian citizen. He was basically an all India persona. Serving the state as Chief Minister, he was inducted to steer the Congress Party as General Secretary of AICC. Again in 1980, when Mrs. Indira Gandhi came back and formed her government, she thought it would be prudent to choose P.V. Narasimha Rao as her foreign minister. P.V. Narasimha Rao was entrusted with this job, which he performed excellently. Even at the very initial year, he had to handle a tricky situation in Sri Lanka, where the Tamils and non-Tamils were engaged in a fierce fight. Actually, the movement for Tamil Elam began. It was conscious impact of this movement in the southernmost part of our country, where there was a rich and powerful province, Tamil Nadu. Because the Tamil sentiments were raised by Sri Lankan Tamils, and they demanded the Tamil Elam. He had to handle these deftly and patiently. P.V. Narasimha Rao became first the Congress President and then Prime Minister after the assassination of Rajiv Gandhi. He managed both offices. Deftly and showed his capacity, recognizing the need of having peaceful coexistence with China, because we had a very long border with China in the northeastern part, spreading up to Ladakh in the north. To maintain peace and tranquility in the border area was first promoted by him, and thereafter it was implemented by successive prime ministers. P.V. Narasimha Rao made unique contribution to build up this nation. Sometimes it appeared that he is taking decision late, but actually it was not late. He patiently waited for creating a consensus over the disputed areas of his decision making, and he succeeded in that. P.V. Narasimha Rao was great sagacious Prime Minister of India. Not only that, he led the Congress Party in a very difficult time. It was not easy to keep the flock of Congress Party and its workers together with the objective of economic development, political integration, and also moving the nation on march. It did so. I am glad that the Centenary celebration is organized by Telangana PCC. But I do believe others will also be inspired to celebrate his birth centenary. Because, as I said earlier, he belonged to India, whole of India, not only a part of it, his birthplace, Telangana. I wish the organizers a grand success of the celebration, which will continue over the year. But I am happy to have the opportunity of being invited to participate on the very first day of it. I wish all the success. Jai Hind.
Hello. Yes, now that you have seen what P.V. Narasimha Garu has done,
Audio.
from the voice of none other than our former president, Sri Pranab Mukherjee ji, I would now like to have a message from Sri Manmohan Singh ji, our former Prime Minister, and who was the Finance Minister during the economic reforms in the first budget in the government of P.V. Narasimha Rao Garu.
My esteemed friend, Captain Uttam Kumar Reddy, President of the Telangana Pradesh Congress Committee, Shri P. Chidambaram, Shri Jairam Ramesh, Dr. J. Geeta Reddy, Shri P.V. Manohar Rao, ladies and gentlemen, Namaskar. I am extremely happy that the Telangana Pradesh Congress Committee is holding year-long birth centenary celebrations of a great son of the soil, our former Prime Minister, late Shri P.V. Narasimha Rao ji. I consider it a great privilege to inaugurate these celebrations today. I am particularly happy that this program has been organized on a day on which I had the privilege as the Finance Minister of India for presenting the first budget of Shri P.V. Narasimha Rao ji's government in 1991. The government took office just after the sad demise of Shri Rajiv Gandhi ji. I had said in my budget speech, referring to Shri Rajiv Gandhi, that he is no more, but his dream lives on. His dream of ushering India into the 21st century. His dream of a strong, united, technologically sophisticated, but humane India. I had dedicated that budget to his inspiring memory. It was a budget that changed India in many ways. It ushered in economic reforms and liberalization. It was a hard choice and a bold decision, and it was possible because Prime Minister Narasimha ji gave me the freedom to roll out things after he fully understood what was ailing India's economy at that time. On this day, while inaugurating his birth centenary celebrations, I pay my humble respects to the man who had the vision and the courage to push these reforms. Like Rajiv ji, Narasimha ji too had great concern for the poor of the country and had told the then Managing Director of IMF, Mr. Michael Kondesu, that reforms in India would have to be mindful of Indian concerns. Economic reforms were preceded by a push in that direction when Shri Rajiv Gandhi was the Prime Minister. Before that, Srimati Indira Gandhi herself was able to grasp the importance of reorienting our economic policy. But real tough decisions had to be urgently taken in 1991 as we were faced with a foreign exchange crisis, with foreign exchange reserves down to about 2 weeks imports, bringing the nation to the edge of a precipice. But then, politically, it was a big question if one could take hard decisions to meet the challenging situation. It was a precariously placed minority government which was dependent on outside support for stability. Yet Narasimha ji was able to carry everyone along, convincing them with his convictions. Enjoying his confidence, I went about my job to carry forward his vision. Victor Hugo had once said that no power on earth can stop an idea whose time has come. I suggested in my budget that India's emergence as major economic power was one such idea. There was an arduous journey ahead, but it was time to let the whole world know loud and clear that India was now wide awake. The rest is history. Looking back, Narasimha ji can truly be called the father of economic reforms in India. Hailing from the Karimnagar district of Telangana, Narasimha ji had embarked on a long political journey starting from the days of freedom struggle. He was first elected as an MLA in 1957, was a minister in 1962, and the chief minister of the combined state of Andhra Pradesh between 1973. He had very actively pushed land reforms in the state. Thereafter, he was a union cabinet minister holding several important portfolios. As Minister for Human Resource Development between 1985-1988, he was responsible for the national policy on education 1986. It had envisaged the setting up of Navodaya schools in the country to bring out the best of our rural youth. Economic reforms and liberalization were indeed his biggest contribution, but his contribution to the country in several different fields cannot be underestimated. On the foreign affairs front, he made efforts to improve our relationship with our neighbors, including China. India signed the South Asian Preferential Trade Agreement along with the SAARC countries. Then the Look East policy was also his brainchild to link India with East and Southeast Asian countries. It was also under his leadership that the Indian space program got an impetus with the successful testing of the augmented satellite launch vehicle and the polar satellite launch vehicle. India also successfully tested the Prithvi missile to strengthen and enhance external security capabilities. He had also asked late Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam in 1996 to get ready for nuclear tests to take India to join a new League of Nations, which were later conducted by Prime Minister Vajpayee-led NDA government in 1998. That was indeed a difficult era in politics. Endowed with a cool temperament and deep political prowess, Narasimha Rao was always open to debate and discussion. He always tried to take the opposition into confidence. To cite a few examples, he had deputed Shri Atal Bihari Vajpayee as the then leader of the Indian delegation to the UN Human Rights Commission in Geneva to discuss Pakistan-sponsored resolution to censor India on its record of human rights in Jammu and Kashmir, which was successfully thwarted. He had also nominated Shri Subramanian Swamy as chairman of the Commission on Labour Standards and International Trade with a cabinet rank. Narasimha Rao left behind an unmatched legacy of being a linguist well versed in several Indian and foreign languages and was indeed a great scholar. He was one of the first converts to new technologically oriented program by not only becoming adept with using a computer but also because became proficient with programming techniques. This was possible because he was always willing to learn new things. In conclusion, I once again pay my tribute to the memories of a great leader, a great son of our country, our former Prime Minister, Shri Narasimha Rao, who was a friend, philosopher, and guide to me in many ways. Jai Hind.
Thank you very much, Manmohan Singh ji, for that very inspiring and informative speech. Both of you worked together to make India what it is today. So thanking you from the Congress of the Telangana Congress and the Centenary Celebrations Committee, once again, we say thank you to you. And now I call upon Sri Chidambaram ji. Chidambaram ji is a very well-known figure. And of course, he's an attorney and has been a finance minister himself and also a home minister. So over to Sri Chidambaram ji. Thank you.
President, Telangana Pradesh Congress Committee, Srimati Dr. Geeta Reddy Garu, Chairman of the Celebrations Committee, respected Sri P.V. Manohar Rao Garu, other colleagues, friends, distinguished invitees to the P.V. Narasimha Rao Centenary Celebrations event. I am extremely grateful to the Celebrations Committee and the Telangana Pradesh Congress Committee for inviting me to speak for a few minutes on this most historic occasion. I'm very happy that Dr. Manmohan Singh has paid rich tribute to his Prime Minister, P. Narasimha Rao, and rightly attributed the title of Father of Economic Reforms to Sri Narasimha Rao. I had known Sri Narasimha Rao Garu ever since I was on the Youth Congress. He was very fond of me, encouraged me to continue to carry on my profession as well as actively participate in the working of the Congress Party. And at every stage, he encouraged me when I moved from the Youth Congress to the PCC and then from the PCC to the AICC and became a Member of Parliament. I'm glad that all of you have remembered that today marks the anniversary, the 29th anniversary, the first budget of the P.V. Narasimha Rao government. But I want to add, today also marks the day on which the new industrial policy was announced by the Narasimha Rao government. The industrial policy was announced in the morning, and the budget was presented as per convention followed then at 5 p.m. on the evening of July 25th. Between the industrial policy and the budget, we broke away from a path that we had followed for nearly 45 years. I know the discussions in the cabinet and separately with the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister today in the 15 days preceding the presentation of the budget. I know how difficult it was for Sri Narasimha Rao to break away from what was called the Nehruvian path. I joked with him that in the last AICC session, Sri Narasimha Rao must have drafted the economic resolution, which would have emphasized, as always, socialism, public sector, commanding heights of the economy, etc., etc. But to break away from that path, because that was absolutely necessary in the year 1991. People used to ask him, how did you change? I remember what he told a group of us, a very small group. Why do they ask me why I have changed? I have not changed. I am standing exactly where I stand, namely committed to the welfare of the people of India, especially the poor of India. I have not moved this way or that way, but the world around me and the ground under me has shifted. If the ground under me has shifted, people say that I have changed, little realizing that the circumstances have changed, the context have changed. I thought it was a brilliant response to why we decided to embark upon very bold economic reforms. Please remember that a few days after the budget, we announced the first devaluation. It was a momentous decision, but the decision that we took with great courage in consultation only with Dr. Manmohan Singh. Not even I, as Commerce Minister, knew about the devaluation until the first step was taken. I was aware of the second step 2 days ago. He placed his trust on people who were chosen, and as long as they enjoyed his trust and carried out his trust, he allowed them to take the decisions. I remember that after the devaluation, the finance minister was very keen that we usher in trade and export-import reforms. I hesitated because I wanted a positive message to the trading community, to the exporting community, before we impose further burdens upon them. So we prepared a plan in about 8 hours or so, and we took it to Sri Narasimha. He was in his bath. He came back wearing a vest and a lungi. He sat on a sofa. There was Dr. Manmohan Singh, there was I, there was Mr. Montek Singh Ahluwalia, and a couple of other officers. All that he looked up and asked Dr. Manmohan Singh was, "Have you signed the file?" Dr. Manmohan Singh said, "Yes." He looked at me and said, "Have you signed the file?" I said, "Of course, I have signed the file." So he said, "Give me the file." I gave it to him. They took the file and signed it first. After signing it, he read the note sheet. That was the absolute confidence he placed in people. And once they enjoyed the confidence, they allowed them to take major decisions. You remember the first trade policy announcements made major changes. We practically abolished import and export licensing and allowed trade to become free, but I will not go into the details. Mr. Narasimha Rao was not very fond of addressing large gatherings. He didn't go on radio and television from time to time, give long lectures. He believed that if his actions were right, the results will be right. And if the results are right, the people will benefit. And if the people will benefit, they will support. So he believed in taking decisions and actions. Those actions improved the economic situation tremendously within a matter of 2 years. Investments poured in, jobs increased. As many of you have remarked, the foreign exchange reserve on the day that the government took over in 1991 was less than $500 million. This morning, on the 10th of July 2020, the last numbers were released. India's foreign exchange reserves are $516 billion. That is over 1,000 times what we had in 1991. I am very grateful to the organizers of this event for inviting me to share my thoughts. There is so much that we can say, but the time is limited. There are other speakers who will have to conclude the program within the time allotted. So I join all others, Sri Pranab Mukherjee, Dr. Manmohan Singh, Srimati Sonia Gandhi, Sri Rahul Gandhi, and all others in paying my tribute to Sri P.V. Narasimha Rao, a great son of Telangana and Andhra Pradesh and South India and India. But let us always remember, whatever we are, by religion or region or language, we are Indians, and that is what Sri Narasimha Rao embodied all his life, from his teenage entry into the Congress until he delegated office as Prime Minister. I pay my tribute to the great son of India, Sri Narasimha Rao, and I remember the pride, privilege I had to work with him for many years. Thank you. Jai.
Thank you very much, Chidambaramji, for giving your precious time and that wonderful message that we all have been waiting for. And you did say his trust in his colleagues was so much that once he trusted them totally. So that's a very wonderful message that has come from you. Thank you once again. And now I would call upon Sri Jairam Rameshji, who also has been a Union Minister for Rural Development. He's a writer, a columnist, and also an economist, and a known personality, especially to the Telangana people, just as Chidambaramji has been known to us. So here's to you, Jairamji.
Thank you, Geeta Reddy ji, Peddilu Garuvinelu Manohar Rao Garuji, Mr. Chidambaram, Uttam Reddy Garu, and all my friends in the Telangana Pradesh Congress Committee. It's indeed an honor and privilege to be here on this occasion. It is the occasion of the presentation of the historic budget of July 2021 by Dr. Manmohan Singh. But Mr. Narasimha Rao became the Prime Minister the previous month. He became the Prime Minister on the 21st of June 1991 under the most difficult of circumstances. And I had the good fortune and privilege of working with him before he became Prime Minister, a few weeks before he became Prime Minister, when he called me and Pranab Mukherjee ji and told us, I remember very clearly, he told Mr. Mukherjee, Pranab, I have been minister in almost all ministries, but I have never been finance minister. And I look to you to help me out and to guide me in the weeks ahead. This was 3 weeks before he became Prime Minister. After he became Prime Minister, Mr. Chidambaram has already mentioned, he took very unpopular decisions. First of all, the two-step devaluation of the Indian rupee. He was not entirely convinced, but he had extraordinary trust in Dr. Manmohan Singh. And between Dr. Manmohan Singh and Dr. Rangarajan, who was then the Deputy Governor of the Reserve Bank of India, very reluctantly, Mr. Narasimha Rao agreed. He agreed to the first devaluation, but actually it was a two-step devaluation. And he was very reluctant for the second step of the devaluation. And it required Dr. Manmohan Singh and Dr. Rangarajan to be able to persuade Mr. Narasimha Rao to allow the two-step devaluation to take place. Then Mr. Chidambaram came up with his bold trade policy, which was a complete departure from the past. And even here, Mr. Narasimha Rao was not entirely convinced what we were doing, but he had trust again in Dr. Manmohan Singh and Mr. Chidambaram, and he allowed the trade policy reforms to continue. Then on the 15th of July, 1991, he spoke in Parliament, and he was attacked. Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee attacked him, Mr. Chandrasekhar attacked him, a lot of leaders, Somnath Chatterjee attacked him, and Mr. Narasimha Rao listened to all of them, and he said, what am I doing? I am faced with an extraordinary situation, and all I am doing is Vinasha Kale Samutpanne Ardham Tyajati Panditaha. Not many people understood what he meant. Vinasha Kale Samutpanne Ardham Tyajati Panditaha. That when you are faced with destruction, the wise man gives up half so that he can retain the half. He floored the Lok Sabha with that description of what he was doing. And a few days later, again, he was asked, again he was criticized, and he said, we are embarking on a long journey. Economic liberalization and reforms is a Mahaprasthana. Mahaprasthana, that is the word he used for, he didn't use words like reforms, liberalization, globalization and all that. That is what Dr. Manmohan Singh and Mr. Chidambaram were using. But Mr. Narasimha Rao was using the word Mahaprasthana. Not many people knew that Mahaprasthana came from Mahaprasthanika Parva, which is the 17th chapter of the Mahabharata. The point I wish to make is that the language and the idiom with which Mr. Narasimha Rao was communicating this revolution in economic policy was an idiom steeped in Indian culture, steeped in Indian civilization. Vinashakale samutpanne ardham tyajati panditaha. And Mahaprasthana, to me, symbolize the erudition of Mr. Narasimha Rao. Then came the budget of July 24th. Mr. Chidambaram has already reminded us that the 24th of July was historic for the budget, which unveiled the economic policy of the Narasimha Rao government. It was also historic because of the new industrial policy. And there were many people in the Congress party who were not entirely convinced that this was the route. Mr. Narasimha Rao himself listened to all of the critics very, very patiently. I knew that in his heart of hearts, he wanted to get it done, but at the same time, he was not entirely convinced that he could take people along. But when it came to the crunch, he put his foot down and made sure that the new industrial policy became a reality. And he sold it to his cabinet colleagues on the basis of one line. And that line was, our policy is change with continuity. There are many things in our policy which we are continuing, but which we are not changing at all, but there are things that we have to change. Change with continuity became the Narasimha Rao mantra. The middle way, the middle path, which he elaborated in his Davos speech early next year in '92, became the philosophy of the Narasimha Rao government. The Narasimha Rao government never abandoned its commitment to the public sector. The Narasimha Rao government never abandoned a very prudent and cautious approach to the opening up of the financial sector. The Narasimha Rao government never abandoned its commitment to employment generation and rural development programs. People forget that Mr. Narasimha Rao was Rural Development Minister, along with being Prime Minister. He was his own Rural Development Minister for much of his tenure. And as Rural Development Minister, he introduced very many new programs in order to give the human face to economic reforms and liberalization that Dr. Manmohan Singh talked about. There have been other achievements of Mr. Narasimha Rao, which Dr. Manmohan Singh has enumerated in the field of science and technology, in the field of foreign policy, but he is, of course, best remembered for the economic transformation through the new industrial policy and through the new trade policy that he masterminded and allowed his cabinet colleagues to push through. I think the trust that he enjoyed with Dr. Manmohan Singh, in fact, his greatest contribution to India, in my view, was to select Dr. Manmohan Singh as finance minister. Because Dr. Manmohan Singh made economic reforms and liberalization acceptable across the widest political spectrum. Neither Mr. Narasimha Rao nor Dr. Manmohan Singh had reputation of being market friendly. If anything, they represented the left of center politics and left of center economics. But the fact that they were putting together this economic reforms package meant that it was acceptable to a large cross-section of Indian society. I remember at one point of time, Mr. Narasimha Rao was very, very downbeat with the criticisms of the budget and the criticisms of economic reforms. And I showed him an interview in Frontline magazine, which K.N. Raj, the great Indian economist, had given. And somebody had asked Dr. Raj about the budget. And Dr. Raj said, well, I have my problems with the budget, but since Manmohan Singh has presented it, I take it at its face value, and I will accept whatever my friend Manmohan says. So that was the credibility of the finance minister, and the credibility of the finance minister would not have been made possible without the full trust and support of his prime minister. I have described this earlier in a book I wrote of that period as a Jugalbandi. This was a Ravi Shankar Allah Rakha type of a Jugalbandi. A Jugalbandi in which the prime minister provided the political leadership and the finance minister provided the technocratic design of what came to be known as economic reforms and liberalization. So I am delighted and I am privileged to have been part of this ceremony that will launch a year-long celebrations. And I think this is the time for us to remind the younger generation, a whole new generation that has been born after 1991, of why 1991 happened, what was the background to 1991, and the scale of the transformation. It is not just 1991 did not just result in economic transformation. It resulted in a political transformation. It resulted in states becoming more powerful. It resulted in a social transformation. Remember that after 1991, it was the Narasimha Rao government that implemented the Mandal Commission reform, the Mandal Commission recommendations as well. So I think 1991 has a significance that goes much beyond economic. And I hope that the year-long celebrations that are being launched today will bring together the entire canvas of change that was unleashed when Mr. Narasimha Rao became Prime Minister in June of 1991. I salute his memory, I recall his contributions, and I am proud to have been part of those contributions for a brief period, but at a crucial period, at a time when it was seen that we were doing things out of compulsion. But very soon, Mr. Narasimha Rao, who started off being a prisoner of compulsion, became a votary out of conviction. And it was he who began to champion in forum after forum the cause of economic reforms and liberalization that was part of the 1991 budget. So thank you, Uttam Reddy Garu. Thank you, Gita Reddy Garu, for having me this afternoon.
Thank you, Jairamji. It was again a wonderful message that you have given us about P.V. Narasimha Rao's role. And of course, we do remember him, and we do remember that we want his legacy to be carried on by the younger generation. A lot of young leaders are here, and so we hope that your speech has also enlightened them quite a bit about what P.V. Narasimha Rao Garu did in his time. Ippudu nenu పూజ్యులు పెద్దలు పివి నరసింహారావు గారి సోదరులను పివి మనోహర్ రావు గారిని వచ్చి వారి సందేశాన్ని ఇవ్వమని కోరుతా ఉన్నాను. వారు రావడం మాకు చాలా సంతోషం. చప్పట్లతో వారిని ఒకసారి స్వాగతించాలి మనం అందరం కూడాను. బికాస్ వారిలో మనం పివి నరసింహారావు గారిని చూసుకోగలుగుతున్నాం కాబట్టి వారు ఇక్కడ ఉండడం మన అదృష్టంగా భావిస్తూ వారిని ప్రసంగించమని కోరుతా ఉన్నాను.
వీటికి ఏమైనా స్ప్రే చేయాలా? అవసరం లేదా? మైక్ ఏమైనా స్ప్రే చేయాలా? ఏం పడుతుంది చేసింది. సభాయ నమః. Distinguished Chief Guest Dr. Manmohan Singh, respected former union ministers, MPs, పివి సెంటనరీ కమిటీ చైర్మన్ పెట్టుకోనా? కిందికి లాగినా వద్దంటున్నా. పెట్టుకుంటే వినరావడం లేదు కదా సరిగ్గా. సరే. Respected Union Ministers, MPs, PV Memorial Committee Chairman, Srimati Geeta Reddy ji, PCC President, Sri Uttam Kumar Reddy ji, committee members, speakers, and beloved friends. I welcome you all wholeheartedly in the as elder family member of Sri P.V. Manohar Rao, P.V. Narasimha Rao. I would like to కళ్ళలో నీళ్ళు వస్తుంటాయి. I would like to remind Sri Manmohan Singh ji on this occasion about our previous meeting which was held in the year 2007, who accepted my invitation in the as chief guest of the meeting Spiritual Values and Peace at New Delhi, and he addressed the gathering and also felicitated Dr. Karan Singh, G.V. Krishnamurthy and Dr. Nirmala Deshpande with Sthitapajna P.V. Memorial Lifetime Achievement Gold Medals. And also he attended several times in AP Bhavan the Jayanti and Vardhanti functions. On this day, అంటే మనందరూ తెలుగులో మాట్లాడేదంతా రాసి చదివిన దానికన్నా 4 ముచ్చట్లు తెలుగులోనే చెప్తే బాగుంటుందని నాకు అనిపిస్తుంది. ఎందుకంటే మీరంతా తెలుగులో మాట్లాడారు కదా. పివి నరసింహారావు గురించి ఇప్పుడే అంతా చాలామంది చెప్పారు. ఇక్కడ కూడా చాలామందికి తెలుసు వారి గురించి. అయితే చాలామందికి తీసేయమంటున్నారా? అదే అంటున్నా మరి. ఏం ముట్టుకోవానో ఏం ముట్టుకోవద్దో. అందరికి తెలిసిన విషయాలు కాకుండా కొన్ని మీకు తెలియని విషయాలు చాలా ఉన్నాయి, చెప్పవలసినవి. అవి మాత్రమే నేను చెప్తాను. మేము చదువుకున్న కాలంలో, అంటే పివి గారు నేను మేమంతా చదువుకున్న కాలంలో ఒక ఊరి నుంచి ఊరికి పోవాలంటే ఒక పెద్ద యుద్ధం చేయాలి. ఆ రోజు కమ్యూనికేషన్ లేదు, చదువు లేదు, ఊళ్ళో ప్రైమరీ స్కూల్ కూడా లేదు ఆ రోజులలో. మరి అటువంటి సందర్భంలో చదువుకోవాలి అని పివి గారు లాంటి వాళ్ళు అనుకుంటే ఏం చేయాలి? ఎప్పుడు ప్రైమరీ స్కూల్ కోసం మా అక్కయ్య గారి ఊరికి వేలేరికి పోయి అక్కడ చదువుకున్నాడు. ఆ తర్వాత మీకు తెలుసు హై స్కూల్కు హనుమకొండకు వచ్చి అక్కడ చదువుకున్నాడు. అక్కడ చదువుకునే రోజులలో చాలామందికి తెలియదు ఆయన ఎంత బ్రిలియంట్ స్టూడెంట్ అంటే, టీచర్లు వెనుక బెంచి మీద కూర్చొని ఆ క్లాస్ పాఠాలు ఆయనతో చెప్పించేది. అది రేర్, ఎక్కడ జరిగినట్టయితే మనం వినలేదు. మెట్రికులేషన్లో ఆయన ఇంగ్లీష్లో సంపాదించుకున్నటువంటి మార్కులు 96% మార్క్స్ నిన్న మొన్నటి వరకు రికార్డ్ అయితే ఉండింది. ఈ మధ్యన ఎవరైనా బద్దలు కొట్టారో లేదో తెలియదు. అక్కడి నుంచి మీకు తెలుసు వందే మాతరం మూమెంట్ జరిగింది ఆల్ ఇండియాలో ఇండిపెండెన్స్ కోసం. ఆ మూమెంట్లో ఈయనే కొంతమంది అక్కడ చదువుకునే వాళ్ళు అందులో పాల్గొన్నారు. ఆ రోజు గవర్నమెంట్, నిజాం గవర్నమెంట్, మీరు వందే మాతరం వాళ్ళు ఎట్లా చేస్తారని అక్కడి నుంచి రెస్ట్రిక్ట్ ఇచ్చి పంపించేశారు. కొంతమంది పోయి నాగ్పూర్ చేరి అక్కడ చదువుకున్నారు. బహుశా నేను అనుకుంటాను, విన్నాను, మరి నాకు కరెక్ట్గా తెలియదు, శ్రీధర్ బాబు గారి రిలేషన్స్ ఎవరో ఉన్నారు అక్కడ, వాళ్ళ ఇంట్లోనే ఏదో ఉన్నాడని. పోయిన వాళ్ళందరూ చాలామంది హాస్టల్లో ఉండి చదువుకున్నారు. ఈయన మాత్రం అక్కడ గల్లీలో వాళ్ళ ఇంటికి పోయి అక్కడ ఉండి చదువుకున్నాడు. అందరు తిరిగి కాలేజీకి పోయిండు, అందరు తిరిగా ఇది చేసిండు. ఎందుకోసం అక్కడ పోయి ఉన్నాడు అంటే ఆయనకు మరాఠీ నేర్చుకోవాలి, అది మెయిన్ కారణం. అక్కడ పర్ఫెక్ట్గా మరాఠీ నేర్చుకున్నాడు. ఆ రోజులలో మా నాన్నగారు తగినంత డబ్బు ఇవ్వకపోతే పార్ట్ టైం జాబ్ కూడా చేశాడు. అక్కడ చేసి మొత్తానికి చదువుకున్నాడు. ఆయన ఎప్పుడు కూడా మొదటి నుంచి చదువులో ఫస్ట్ అండ్ ఫస్ట్. అక్కడ కూడా బీఎస్సీలో ఫస్ట్ క్లాస్ పాస్ అయినాడు. ఆ తర్వాత ఎల్ఎల్బి చదివినాడు. ఎల్ఎల్బిలో గోల్డ్ మెడల్ సంపాదించినాడు. చాలామందికి తెలుసు అనుకోండి ఇది, అయినా నాకు తెలిసిన విషయాలు కాబట్టి, ఇక్కడ సందర్భం ఉన్నది కాబట్టి, ఆయన గురించే మనం మాట్లాడాలి కాబట్టి అవి చెప్పాను. తర్వాత ఆయనే హైదరాబాద్కి వచ్చి డాక్టర్ బూర్గుల రామకృష్ణరావు పెద్ద వకీల్ అప్పుడు, ఆయన దగ్గర జూనియర్ చేరాడు. కొద్ది రోజులే ఆయన వకాలత్ చేశాడు. కానీ ఈయన మంచిగా ఇంట్లో పడుకోనేది. రామకృష్ణరావు గారు, పివి నువ్వు చూసుకోపో కేసులు. అప్పుడు ఆయన చేసినటువంటి డ్రాఫ్ట్స్ అక్కడికి పోయి ఆయనే జడ్జిల దగ్గర చేసినటువంటి వాదన, వాళ్ళ ముందు చేసినటువంటి వాదన ఇప్పటికి కూడా చాలామంది అప్రిషియేట్ చేస్తారు. అంత బ్రిలియంట్ ఉండే అన్నమాట. ఇక తర్వాత మీకు తెలుసు సంస్కరణల గురించి మంత్రిగా అయిన తర్వాత అన్ని పోర్ట్ఫోలియోలు చెప్పారు, కేంద్రంలో కూడా చెప్పారు. ఇవన్నీ ఆయనే చేయగలిగాడు, ఇంకే తక్కిన మినిస్టర్లు ఎందుకు చేయగలగలేదు? ఒక్కటే ఉదాహరణ చెప్తాను. ఏ సబ్జెక్ట్ అయినా మీరు ఏ పోర్ట్ఫోలియో ఇచ్చినా ఆ పోర్ట్ఫోలియో గురించి లోతుగా పరిశీలించి ఏం చేస్తే బాగుంటుంది దీనికి అని ఆలోచించి, ఎంతమంది వ్యతిరేకిస్తారు దీని మీద అది మొదలే ఆలోచించి ఆయన తీసుకునే స్టెప్ అట్లా ఉండేదన్నమాట. ఆయన ఎండోమెంట్ మినిస్టర్ ఉండగా నేను ఆయనతో కలిసి కాళహస్తిలో పరమాచార్య గారు ఏదో మీటింగ్ పెట్టాడు. ఈయన ఎండోమెంట్ మినిస్టర్ కాబట్టి తప్పకుండా ఈయన పోయినాడు అక్కడికి. ఆయనతో నేను పోయినాను. అక్కడ దగ్గరలో ఒకటి వ్యాసాశ్రమం ఉంది, ఏర్పేడు అనుకుంటా ఆ ఊరు. చాలా పెద్ద ఆశ్రమం ఉంది, చాలా పెద్ద లైబ్రరీ ఉంది అక్కడ. ఈయనకు ఆ లైబ్రరీ మొట్టమొదటి దాంట్లోకి పోగానే చక్కగా మీ లైబ్రరీ అక్కడ అని అడిగిండు. లైబ్రరీకి పోయిండు. ఆ లైబ్రరీలో ఆయన ఆ పుస్తకాలు నాకైతే జ్ఞాపకం లేదు, కాకపోతే శిల్పానికి సంబంధించినటువంటి, ఆగమానికి సంబంధించినటువంటి పుస్తకాలు ఏదో ఆయన అడిగాడు. ఆ ముచ్చట మొత్తం చూసిండ్రు. సార్ ఇక్కడ ఆ పుస్తకాలు ఇక్కడ లేవు, మీకు కావాలంటే మేము తెప్పిస్తాము, అవి మద్రాసులో ఉన్నాయన్నారు పెద్ద లైబ్రరీలో. సరే ఆ అడ్రస్ ఇవ్వమన్నాడు. ఆ మద్రాసు నుంచి అక్కడికి రాసి, ఉత్తరం రాసి, అక్కడి నుంచి అవి తెప్పించుకొని అన్ని స్టడీ చేశాడు. ఇక లిబరలైజేషన్ గురించి, దాని గురించి అందరు చెప్పారు. నా అనుభవంలో నేను చెప్తాను, మీ అందరికి కూడా అనుభవాలు ఉన్నాయి ఇవి. మా అన్నయ్య ఇక్కడ మినిస్టర్గా ఉన్నప్పుడు ఆయనతో ఇప్పుడు మేము మాట్లాడాలంటే అప్పుడు మా ఊళ్ళో వంగరలే ఉంటే హుజరాబాద్ పోయి 3 గంటలు 4 గంటలు కూర్చుంటే అది అదృష్టం ఉంటే కలిసేదే, లేకపోతే 4 గంటల తర్వాత కూడా కలవకపోయేది. ఆయనతో మాట్లాడాను. అటువంటి పరిస్థితుల్లో ఇవాళ ప్రతి వాళ్ళు, కూరగాయల వాళ్ళు, ఊడ్చే వాళ్ళు, పెద్దవాళ్ళ దగ్గర నుంచి చిన్నవాళ్ళ వరకు జేబులు సెల్ ఫోన్ పెట్టుకుంటున్నారు. అది ఏమిటి కారణం? ఇప్పుడు మీరు చెప్పిన సంస్కరణల కారణం. ముఖ్యంగా అప్పుడు మన్మోహన్ సింగ్ గారు చేసినటువంటి ఈ లిబరలైజేషన్ పాలసీతోటి ఇవన్నీ వచ్చినాయి. ఏదైనా ఈ సందర్భంలో నేనేం కోరుతున్నానంటే, ఆయన ప్రధానమంత్రి భారతదేశానికి, తెలంగాణకు కాదు. అందుకని నేషనల్ లెవెల్లో ఒక కమిటీ, ఆయన మెమోరియల్ కమిటీ ఒకటి పెట్టి, ఆయన చేసినటువంటి కార్యక్రమాలు ఏంటో మీకు మాకు తెలియడం కాదు కదా, అందరికీ తెలియాలి. 96లో ఆయన పదవి విరమణ చేస్తే ఇప్పటికి ఎన్ని ఏళ్ళయింది? 24 ఏళ్ళయింది. ఇప్పుడు 24 ఏళ్ల పిల్లగానికే ఏం తెలియదు పివి గారు ఏం చేశారనేది. మరి అది దేశానికి, ప్రపంచానికి అన్నీ తెలియాలి అంటే ఒక కమిటీ పెట్టి దానికి తగినటువంటి ఏర్పాట్లు చేస్తే వచ్చే జనరేషన్కి, ఇప్పటి యూత్కు పనికొస్తుందని చెప్పి నేను అనుకుంటున్నాను. దానికోసం మరి పెద్దలు సెంట్రల్ లెవెల్లో వాళ్ళు ఆలోచించి దానికి ఏదన్నా తగినటువంటి ఏర్పాట్లు చేసుకుంటే బాగుంటుంది. ఏదేమైనా ఈ యొక్క కార్యక్రమం మన ఉత్తమ్ కుమార్ రెడ్డి గారి చొరవతోటి, గీతారెడ్డి గారి చైర్పర్సన్గా ఎంపిక చేశారు. ఈ కమిటీ వాళ్లకు, మీకు ఈ సందర్భంలో ఈ సంవత్సరం అంతా మంచి కార్యక్రమాలు మీరు చేసి, మంచి కార్యక్రమాలు మీరు జ్ఞాపకం వీళ్ళకు జనరేషన్ జ్ఞాపకం ఉండేలాగా చేస్తారని చెప్పి నేను ఆశిస్తున్నాను. ఈ అవకాశం నాకు ఇచ్చి మీరు నాకు ఈ గౌరవం ఇచ్చినందుకు మరొకసారి మీకు ధన్యవాదాలు చెప్పి, సర్వే జనా సుఖినో భవంతు.
కృతజ్ఞతలు మనోహర్ రావు గారు. అద్భుతంగా మాట్లాడి మాకు తెలియని విషయాలు ఎన్నో ఆయన గురించి చెప్పడం అంటే ఈరోజు ఎన్నో నేర్చుకున్నటువంటి విషయాలు మేము కూడా చాలా మీకు మా కృతజ్ఞతలు మరోసారి తెలియచేయాలి. మీరు ఎప్పుడు కూడా ఈ కమిటీ మీ ఆధ్వర్యంలోనే నడుస్తుంది. ఎందుకంటే మీరు మాకు ఎన్నో సలహాలు, సూచనలు కూడా చేయగలరు. సంవత్సరం పొడుగు చేయాల్సిన కమిటీ కాబట్టి మిమ్మల్ని మా చీఫ్ పేట్రన్గా మేము ఉంచడమే మా ఒక అదృష్టంగా భావిస్తూ, మరి మీ సూచనలన్నీ కూడా బాగా మేము ముందుకు తీసుకెళ్తాము, మీతో కలిసి నడుస్తామని చెబుతూ, మరి ఇప్పుడు हमारे इंचार्ज AICC सेक्रेटरी इंचार्ज हमारे कुंतिया जी, our Kuntiya ji who has been associated with Telangana for so many years, he's become part of Telangana. So up I invite him to please give his message. Shri R.C. Kuntiya ji.
Sir, please unmute.
Hello, am I audible now? Hello.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Good afternoon to everybody. Most respected ex-PM CWC member Dr. Manmohan Singh Garu, ex-Finance Minister P. Chidambaram Garu, ex-Minister Jairam Ramesh Garu,
చెప్పి నేను అనుకుంటున్నాను.